Hi folks, my name is Phil and welcome to Grounded, the series which looks at airlines of yesteryear. In this episode we'll take a look at Midwest Express. Headquartered in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, the origins of Midwest Express go right back to 1948 when Kimberly-Clark, a paper products company, established a corporate flight department. This new department would arrange travel for various company executives who needed to fly between the Kimberly-Clark headquarters in Neenah, Wisconsin and its paper mills scattered across the country. A reorganization took place in 1969 with the formation of Expo Aviation. This new division would be responsible for the maintenance and operation of the corporate fleet. In 1982, Expo Aviation began operating shuttle flights from their headquarters at Outagamie Airport, now known as Appleton International Airport. These shuttle flights were for Kimberly-Clark employees rather than the public and operated between Outagamie, Memphis and Atlanta. After 2 years of operating these staff shuttles, Kimberly-Clark decided to make its move into the scheduled airline business. Previously, this was a very tightly controlled industry. However, the Airline Deregulation Act, which had passed 4 years earlier, had opened up the skies to everyone and made launching and running an airline much more easy. The 1978 Airline Deregulation Act has been mentioned a couple of times already in this series. After all, it was the single most important event in the history of commercial aviation within the United States. The Act would allow individual airlines to pick and choose their routes as they saw fit, without the need to apply for route licenses from the increasingly outdated and painfully slow Civil Aeronautics Board. Airlines were no longer bound by state lines either. This meant that intrastate carriers such as Air Florida, Air California and PSA could grow and prosper. Well, it worked out better for the last two and less so for Air Florida. While Outagamie Airport was perfectly suitable for the existing Expo Aviation charter operation, it wasn't particularly ideal for an airline hub. With this in mind, the new airline operation would focus on Milwaukee, choosing the largest city in the state of Wisconsin as its main base of operations. The new airline would be called Midwest Express and choose a very smart-looking livery which was primarily dark blue with a light grey belly, with red, white and blue stripes running the length of the fuselage. These stripes would then point upwards onto the rudder of the aircraft's tail, which also featured the airline's initials, ME. Midwest Express began operations on the 11th of June 1984, initially with a single DC-9 jet and a Convair 580 prop brought in from Expo Aviation. The Convair would wear the Midwest Express livery, albeit without any airline branding, and would primarily be used on shuttling employees rather than fare-paying passengers. The airline's first routes were from Milwaukee to Appleton, Boston and Dallas-Fort Worth. The choice of Appleton was an obvious one, however both Boston and Dallas were picked as at the time there was no direct service on offer from Milwaukee. By the end of 1984, Midwest Express was operating 3 DC-9s and had expanded service to include Newark served from Appleton. This was very short-lived, however, as by the spring of 1985, Newark was dropped in favour of Atlanta and Wisconsin's state capital, Madison. Tragedy would strike the airline very early on, when on Friday the 6th of September 1985, Midwest Express Flight 105 crashed seconds after takeoff. The flight had originated in Appleton and after stopping in Milwaukee would continue on to Atlanta. Just 18 seconds after leaving the runway with the DC-9 climbing through 700 feet, the aircraft's starboard engine exploded. The DC-9 began to roll to the right, seemingly out of control. It then barrel rolled at least once before crashing less than a mile away from the airport, with it all over in less than 20 horrifying seconds. All 27 passengers and 4 crew were killed in the crash. This was to be, fortunately, the only fatal accident for the airline. A disaster like this might have finished off such a young airline, however Midwest Express persevered. The Convair was ditched and 2 more DC-9s joined the fleet. Washington DC was added to the route network towards the end of the year as Midwest Express continued its steady expansion. Despite the tragedy in 1985, Midwest Express had established a sound reputation. The airline was offering a level of service that no other regular passenger airline in the US could. The Midwest Express fleet was fully fitted out with leather seats, 21.5 inches wide with legroom to match. The seats were arranged in a 2+2 configuration rather than the usual 2+3 that is standard with the DC-9 narrow-body. It wasn't just the incredible seats that set Midwest Express out from the rest, they had a level of service to match. From the incredibly friendly and attentive personnel, both on the ground and in the air, right through to the meals on board. Every flight would have a meal service, be it breakfast, lunch or dinner, and it wouldn't be some generic reheated airline food. Breakfast would consist of fruit salad with a side of fresh yogurt and cereal. Main meals offered included steak, poached salmon, lobster thermidor and shrimp cocktails and fruit, all served on fine china with proper silverware and table linen. Meals would be accompanied with complimentary wine, or, if it was breakfast, champagne. Midwest actually spent more on passenger meals than any other US carrier, an average of $9.59 at 1997 rates, which was over $2 more than both American and United. For comparison, US Air, which had just rebranded to US Airways, spent the least of the conventional carriers at $2.50 a head. Southwest was 20 cents, which was to be expected considering they were a low-fare carrier. Despite the incredible level of service offered, Midwest didn't charge a premium for its product, instead keeping their prices in line with that of rival carriers. It also didn't offer many cut-price tickets and thus avoided getting dragged into a protracted fare war and the damage that they inevitably caused. Instead, Midwest would let its service speak for itself. It was offering a first-class level of service for a near-economy fare. The airline adopted the rather catchy slogan, "The best care in the air," and they really did. It wasn't just some tagline created by a marketing department. Midwest and their staff really did care. Midwest was so liked by passengers that, unlike almost all the sizable airlines, it wasn't included in the transportation department's ranking of customer complaints through the 1980s and into the mid-90s because it hadn't received a minimum 10 complaints a year. Midwest continued a steady and carefully thought-out expansion throughout the latter half of the 1980s. A deal was signed for 2 McDonnell Douglas MD-88s with delivery scheduled for early 1990. These had been destined for another carrier, however hadn't been picked up and thus delivered to Midwest brand new. Aside from having a larger passenger capacity, the two Mad Dogs had longer legs, which would allow Midwest to offer non-stop longer distance services. Midwest had also added Detroit, Denver and Grand Rapids to their route network, along with Fort Lauderdale and Tampa seeing a seasonal service. Midwest had been careful about its route strategy, focusing primarily on business travellers in cities with strong business bases that have few, if any, non-stop flights to Milwaukee. The one exception to this was Detroit, which, while made for a popular city pairing, was also served by several competitors. Midwest would serve this route from 1988 until 1992, when it gave up and dropped the loss-making route altogether. 1989 would also see Midwest Express partner with the Mesa Air Group of Phoenix, Arizona with the launch of Skyway Airlines. This new commuter airline would be operated by Mesa under a franchise agreement with Midwest and would operate several Beech 1900C turboprops under the name Midwest Express Connection. As well as increasing connectivity within the region, Skyway would act as a feeder to Midwest Express, with services between Milwaukee and Green Bay, Rockford, Des Moines, Indianapolis, Kalamazoo via Lansing, Flint, Saginaw, Muskegon, Eau Claire and La Crosse. Both Midwest Express and Skyway Airlines would grow steadily as the 1990s began. By mid-1991, Midwest had added flights to Kansas City, San Francisco and San Diego via Los Angeles, making Midwest a coast-to-coast operator. Skyway, as the Midwest Express Connection, had added numerous destinations, a number of which were served on multi-stop flights, and had extended its reach as far as Rochester, Buffalo, Columbus and Baltimore. Midwest Express was one of only 2 US airlines to remain profitable in the wake of the Gulf War, with the other unsurprisingly being Southwest. Midwest had managed to scrape a very small profit at the time, but a profit nonetheless when the rest of the major airlines were bleeding money. Midwest could have easily cut its standard of service, but then it would have hurt Midwest's reputation, and besides, once an airline starts down that slippery slope, it's nigh on impossible to recover, with the airline eventually cutting back on everything until, well, Ryanair or Spirit levels of frills, or lack thereof. Midwest would instead continue on a steady course of expansion, as well as maintain its high standards of service, which, considering the other airlines cutting back on theirs, made Midwest stand out even further. By February 1994, Midwest was operating a fleet of 19 aircraft and serving 22 destinations, following the addition of Las Vegas, Phoenix and Fort Myers to the route network, the latter two being seasonal. Midwest would actually be quite successful with the seasonal routes as the snowbirds migrated from cold Wisconsin to warmer climes further south. 1994 would also see Midwest Express Holdings, the Midwest Holding Company, establish Astral Aviation. Astral would take over the operation of Skyway Airlines, effectively bringing it in-house. As part of this, the Mesa-operated Beech 1900Cs were replaced by a fleet of Beech 1900Ds. I've just realised that I've got this far into the episode and I've not mentioned the legend that is the Midwest Express cookie. The legend goes that one day during an empty sector, that is a flight with no passengers, one of the flight attendants was experimenting with the onboard ovens and made cookies. This might sound far-fetched to some, but back in my flying days, if we knew we had an empty sector, we would bring some treats to share out on that leg. Sometimes it would be crumpets or chocolate fudge cake. The ovens we used were convection ovens and could easily heat up cookie dough. To be honest, the part that seems far-fetched to me is that said flight attendant didn't get a bollocking for misusing the oven, but instead praise from management. Anyway, the cookies were a hit with the crew on that flight and would later become a Midwest Express staple. Just look at the front cover of this August 2001 timetable. The cookies would be made off-site and then heated up in the ovens before being handed out to passengers on every flight. I bet their aircraft smelled absolutely lovely inside and far better than the Oda Boeing that we're used to these days. In 1995, Kimberly-Clark began to divest themselves of their airline over the course of two public offerings. The first, that September, would see 4.5 million shares, or 70% of Midwest Express holdings, sold. The remaining shares would be sold in early 1996. Despite the divestiture, Kimberly-Clark would guarantee a $20 million line of credit to the company until the year 2000. The sell-off wasn't due to Midwest losing money. In fact, Midwest was still turning a profit. It was just part of a restructuring, as at the time, Kimberly-Clark shelled out a whopping $9.4 billion on acquiring the Scott Paper Company. That is, the Scott Paper Company and not the Michael Scott Paper Company, which was worth considerably less. The sell-off didn't stop Midwest from growing, however. According to the airline's CEO, the only constraint to Midwest's expansion was how fast they could grow without losing their focus and control of their quality. In fact, 1995 would see Midwest open a hub in Omaha, Nebraska, and also operate its first scheduled international flights with a route from Milwaukee to Toronto. The new Omaha hub would see flights to Washington, D.C., Newark and Los Angeles, with flights to Boston and the nearby Kansas City being added within a couple of years. By 1999, Midwest Express was operating a fleet of 35 aircraft, 24 DC-9s and 11 MD-80s. The airline had signed a deal with SAS, that's the airline and not the legendary division of the British Armed Forces, for 4 MD-81s for delivery the following year. These aircraft, like all of their other second-hand MD-81s and MD-82s, would be overhauled by Midwest themselves, as the airline had established a 189,000 square foot two-hangar maintenance complex in Milwaukee. Employing 340 technical service staff, the Midwest Express Maintenance Center had become a DC-9 and MD-80 specialist, capable of complete structural, avionics and aircraft systems work on the DC-9 and MD-80 families. This work included all airframe checks from A to E, along with some engine work, although engine overhauls were outsourced off-site. The year would also see subsidiary Astral Aviation become the world's first operator of the Dornier 328 jet. Astral, still operating as Midwest Express Connection, would go on to operate 12 of the type, as well as place an order for 5 Dornier 428 jets. The 428 was a 44-seat stretched version of the 328, but would never be built as Dornier would collapse before even a prototype could be built. Astral had chosen the 328 jet as they had both noticed and understood the public's perception of turboprop aircraft. To quote the Midwest CEO, the 328 jet was selected because regional airline customers would rather fly on jets than turboprops, and we have to face the fact that the industry is changing in that regard. The 328 jet was of course a modified version of the regular Dornier 328 turboprop. Due to size constraints within the cabin, it wouldn't be fitted out with the trademark Midwest wide leather seats, but would still boast a reasonable level of comfort. The 32-seat 328 would both allow an increase in capacity on existing routes and free up the smaller beach turboprops to test the water on new routes. Heading into the new millennium, Midwest Express was in its heyday. The airline was serving 27 destinations from Milwaukee and Omaha. Kansas City and Indianapolis had seen an increase in flights, and there was talk of the airline establishing a new hub, with Kansas City looking the most likely candidate. There were some more MD-81s due to arrive over the next 2 years, and the airline was looking ahead at a fleet replacement strategy. Midwest had been eyeing up several aircraft types. Both the Boeing 737 and Airbus A320 families had a lot to offer. The Boeing 717, formerly known as the McDonnell Douglas MD-95, was looking like the most likely choice. After all, it was a modern successor to their existing DC-9 and MD-80 fleets, just rebadged as a Boeing. April 2001 would see Midwest Express Holdings place a whopper of an order, 20 Boeing 717s with an option for 30, as well as 40 Embraer regional jets, 135, 140 and 145 series models. The first 717s were slated for delivery in February 2003, with further deliveries expected once every 2 months. The 717 would have a capacity of 88 passengers in the customary 2x2 Midwest Express leather seats. The Embraer jets were to join the Midwest Express Connection or Skyway fleet, allowing the beach turboprops to be withdrawn. With deliveries planned to begin in March 2002, the plan was for the Embraers to replace the Dornier jets. This was despite a number of 328s still due to be delivered. The airline was unhappy with the German manufacturers. They'd axed the 428 program, which would have given Skyway a flexible family of aircraft. In total, the whole Boeing and Embraer order was worth a potential $1 billion. They say, though, that timing is key, and just a few months later the world watched in horror at what would happen in New York, Washington and Pennsylvania. Midwest, just like other airlines around the world, were shaken to the core and found themselves on damage control. The Embraer order hadn't yet been finalised, so was called off entirely, and the Boeing order, which hadn't yet been finalised either, was pushed back. Midwest would put pen to paper in April 2002 for 25 717s, with delivery coming in at a faster rate of 1 per month. The sped-up delivery schedule would allow Midwest to begin withdrawing its DC-9 fleet early in an attempt at cutting costs. The DC-9s were gas guzzlers, and while that hadn't been too much of a problem in the late 1990s, it sure was now the price of jet fuel had rocketed. The 717s were much more fuel efficient, and with a larger capacity than the DC-9, were seen as Midwest's escape from peril. Midwest, like so many other carriers, had found itself forced to make cuts to its service, but in the case of Midwest it was such a major cut. The meal service, formerly served on fine china, was scrapped and replaced by a buy-on-board service, although the cookie remained. The airline also removed some of the legendary seats and replaced them with conventional rows of cloth-covered seats, dubbed the Saver Service. While both were major changes to an airline that had a stellar reputation, they were deemed necessary to save the airline, as for the first time in 14 years Midwest had made a loss. The losses continued into 2002, with the airline reporting a further loss of $10.6 million that year. On March 1, 2003, Midwest Express rebranded as Midwest Airlines. The airline had held the ceremony at the Boeing Long Beach plant the day before whilst taking delivery of their first 717. The airline had said that the express part of their name had made them sound like a regional airline rather than a coast-to-coast operator. At the same time, Skyway, which had been operating under the name Midwest Express Connection, rebranded to Midwest Connect, which was less of a mouthful. As part of the new identity, Midwest Airlines would revise their livery. At first glance, the livery is basically the same, just with a gold cheat line added to the existing red, white and blue lines, with the blue now tapering down towards the rear of the fuselage. The Express titles were dropped, of course, just leaving the Midwest, and the most notable change was that to the tail logo design. The ME was replaced by the logo, supposedly a heavily stylised wing with an alleged resemblance to the Milwaukee Art Museum, though to be honest, I don't really see it. Something else that I didn't see at first was that the aircraft engines, now painted blue, have several gold bands wrapping round them, 4 on the left and 3 on the right. These bands were added as a subtle nod to the flight crews, as captains have 4 bars and sit on the left, while first officers have 3 and sit on the right. It may be subtle, but once it's pointed out to you, you can see it, unlike the Art Museum, which despite staring at it for hours still evades me. Oh, hang on. Yeah, I can sort of see it now, but it did take all night. What I've also heard elsewhere is that the logo is in fact 2 stylised wings, the solid gold wing evoking Midwest strength as a company, with the second wing's curved lines symbolising flight towards the future. The small M cradled inside the gold wing symbolised the care and comfort provided to the airline's passengers. Finally, a single arc passing through the solid gold wing and touching the M is a reminder of the attention paid to passengers and employees alike. That might sound pretentious, as of course it is, but I can see it, well, the gold wing at least. Probably why I don't design airline logos for a living. I mean, it took me days to finally see the Art Museum in the design, so who am I to judge? In January 2004, Midwest Express Holdings changed its name to the Midwest Air Group to reflect the rebranding of its 2 subsidiaries the year before. 2004 would also see the final DC-9s leave the Midwest fleet, leaving just a handful of MD-80s as well as the new 717s. In 2006, Midwest announced that Midwest Airlines, not to be confused with their own Skyway, would operate a number of feeder flights under the Midwest Connect brand. Midwest were and still are a large operator of regional jets and operate aircraft on behalf of other carriers. Midwest would operate a number of Canadair regional jets for Midwest Connect, and I'll admit, those aircraft do look pretty smart in a Midwest livery. On the 23rd of May 2006, at a ceremony at the Boeing Long Beach plant, Midwest Airlines, along with Airline, took delivery of two Boeing 717s, line numbers 5154 and 5156. 5154 went to Midwest, with 5156, the final 717 ever built, going to Airline, who were also the type's launch customer. Later that year, in December, Airline would publicly reveal that they had made several approaches to acquire Midwest Airlines and had been rebuffed on each occasion. This was a rather tactless move by Airline. By going public with this announcement, they hoped that the Midwest shareholders would apply pressure on the board of directors to sell the company. The result didn't go Airline's way, as a bidding war ensued between themselves and TPG Capital, formerly the Texas Pacific Group. TPG didn't have previous airline experience, but found a partner in Northwest Airlines. Eventually, a deal was reached, with TPG and Northwest acquiring the Midwest Air Group for $450 million, though it would take until February 2008 for the US Department of Justice to approve of the merger following antitrust investigations. Despite new ownership, Midwest was struggling and things were only going to get worse when the 2008 financial crash hit. The year before, Midwest had ripped out even more of its trademark wide leather seats and crammed in more conventional seats in their place, but more needed to be done. It was deemed uneconomical to operate a mixed fleet of MD-80s and 717s, so announced their plan to phase them out by the end of the year. There were also heavy job cuts too. Around 25% of the workforce was axed as the airline found itself trying to avoid bankruptcy. Things continued to go pear-shaped. TPG withheld $3.3 million that was due to Skyway, putting increased pressure on the regional carrier. On September 3, 2008, in an attempt to avoid joining the increasing number of airlines going bankrupt that month, Midwest accepted a $60 million financing package. This was paid in part by TPG and Northwest, but also through a $20 million loan from Republic Holdings, another airline group. As part of the so-called rescue package, Midwest would be phasing out all of its aircraft, instead outsourcing its flying program to Republic, who would operate on their behalf. This would result in hundreds more redundancies and bring that year's layoff total to a staggering 1,850 employees. Republic would operate 12 Embraer 170 regional jets on behalf of Midwest, and while these did look rather smart in the Midwest livery, it just wasn't the same. It seems that Midwest's loyal passengers had noticed the difference too, with many comments to the local Milwaukee news stations. On June 23, 2009, the inevitable happened. Republic announced that they would acquire Midwest for $31 million. Republic would pay just $6 million in cash, with the remaining $25 million as an IOU convertible to stock. TPG and Northwest had decided to cut their losses just 22 months after acquiring the company, and boy, they were some losses. The pair lost an eye-watering $419 million on their investment. The takeover would also see the departure of Midwest's longtime CEO and president, Tim Hoeksema. Originally a first officer with Expo Aviation, he went on to become the company's chief pilot and would help establish Midwest Express and take the helm. His departure would coincide with the airline's 25th anniversary, but was met with mixed reception. While he had built up Midwest Express, he had also oversaw the drastic cutbacks following 9/11. Those cuts to the service and the workforce had left a bad taste in the mouths of many employees, who may have been happy to see him go. It is of course a case of be careful what you wish for, as worse was yet to come. With Republic now fully in control of Midwest, the writing was on the wall for Milwaukee's hometown airline. The 717s were on the way out as part of the original agreement, and along with them were their crews, who would also have the indignity of negotiating for their jobs with Republic over the coming weeks. The final Midwest-operated flight took place on November 2, 2009, when Flight 210 from Boston arrived in Milwaukee. It was met by over 300 Midwest employees, both currently employed and recently canned, with an unofficial party taking place at the airport's hotel. The local TV news crew were there to report on the occasion, calling it the end of an era, with the news crew interviewing numerous passengers, all of which praised the Midwest of old and slammed the Republic-owned Midwest, while Republic laughably tried to say nobody would notice the changes. Republic may or may not have planned on resuming Midwest as an independent airline. However, plans changed following Republic's takeover of the struggling Frontier Airlines. The Denver-based second incarnation of Frontier was acquired in October 2009. A few months later, in April 2010, Republic announced that Midwest would be merged into Frontier in 2011. Frontier would themselves be sold off by Republic within a couple of years, but not before cutting over 56% of the Milwaukee routes and axing a few hundred more Milwaukee employees. What about the cookie, though? Well, the cookie, which had even found itself being sold in local stores, outlived Midwest and was adopted by Frontier. Though as Frontier themselves moved towards being an ultra-low-cost carrier, the cookie finally crumbled and was replaced by animal crackers. The reason was that Frontier didn't want to have aircraft ovens that were only going to be used to heat cookies, so when the ovens were removed, the cookies had to go too. But wait, there's more. For the past few years, there's been an attempted revival of the Midwest brand, with Midwest Express Airlines being founded on December 27, 2018. This new Midwest would partner with Elite Airways, a charter operator who would operate some Canadair regional jet aircraft for Midwest. Proposed destinations included Cincinnati, Omaha, and Grand Rapids, all served from Milwaukee. The launch date was postponed a few times, but things were still looking hopeful. COVID knocked the launch further back, but in March 2020, Midwest cut ties with Elite, then filed a lawsuit claiming breach of contract. As of March 2021, there's no update on this airline venture. Okay, so what went wrong at the original Midwest? Midwest were an outstanding airline. They were well managed with a careful approach to expansion. The airline set about to provide a service far better than any other carrier of the day. The Midwest product was far superior to the first-class offerings of what we now call the US legacy carriers. Midwest had even managed to win dozens of awards over the years, including #1 US domestic airline by Condé Nast for 6 years in a row. Despite this high-end level of service, Midwest didn't charge a premium for its product, instead keeping its prices in line with the competition and yet managed to remain profitable. The key to Midwest's success was its level of service and its fairly centralised hub in Milwaukee, which could entice folks flying cross-country to fly Midwest via the Midwest. Where it went wrong was when the airline was forced to make huge cutbacks following 9/11. The luxury seats remained at first, but the incredible food service went out of the window, and as I said earlier, a lot earlier actually, as I've been going on for quite a while, is that once an airline starts making cuts to its product, it's a slippery slope. Midwest found that out the hard way. They cut the product and people noticed. The airline, while still being considered the hometown airline for Milwaukee, it was no longer offering anything different to the competition, and therefore folks might now choose the competition if that was more convenient. It was something touched on by the news crew as Republic took over. That Midwest used to be special, but that Midwest is gone. Midwest were, of course, in a tricky situation. They'd been profitable for 14 years and needed to act fast. The DC-9s, whilst being old, including the second and fourth models of the 1960s production line, were relatively low on flight hours. The problem was, post 9/11, the cost of jet fuel rocketed, making the DC-9s a costly aircraft to operate. There is also a small irony in the timing of events. As part of the original sale by Kimberly-Clark, KC had agreed a $20 million line of credit on top of the airline's existing $55 million bank credit facilities. However, KC were only offering that up until the year 2000. If that had been extended for just even 2 more years, then maybe Midwest wouldn't have had to make those drastic changes in an attempt to survive. Perhaps it would have been better if Midwest had folded in 2002. They could have been regarded as just another casualty of 9/11, as after all, dozens of airlines were dropping like flies. If they had, then they wouldn't have gone on to tarnish their legacy during their fight for survival and would have avoided the indignity of what was Republic's ownership. Midwest Express is still held in high regard by a lot of folks. The airline put its name to a lot of things, aside from cookies. In 1998, Midwest Express secured the naming rights to the Wisconsin Center, a convention and exhibition center located in downtown Milwaukee. It was named the Midwest Express Center until 2002, when it became the Midwest Airlines Center. It briefly became the Frontier Airlines Center and is now simply known as the Wisconsin Center. Midwest also sponsored the Milwaukee Brewers baseball team, as well as provided charter services to the team until they withdrew their MD-80s in 2008. Midwest was also a key player in boosting the profile of Milwaukee and enticing businesses to come to the area thanks to their reliable and unbeatable service. The 1978 Airline Deregulation Act has been mentioned a couple of times already in this series, with Air Florida being touted as the success story of the time, although we all know how that one ended. I believe, however, that Midwest were the true success story, and hopefully when folks think of Midwest today, they remember the good times and not what Republic did. Until next time, thanks for watching.